April 17th, 1943. The skies over central Germany, 26,000 feet. Oberleutnant Franz Weber of Jagdgeschwader 26 banked his Messerschmitt Bf 109G through scattered clouds, scanning for Allied bombers with the confidence of a predator in familiar hunting grounds. For nearly 3 years, the Luftwaffe had dominated these skies, and even as American bombers pushed deeper into the Reich, Weber smiled at the thought of the new escort fighters accompanying them, clumsy, short-range machines that posed little threat to experienced German pilots. "No Allied plane can match our performance at altitude," he had assured his younger wingman that morning. "Remember your training, and you'll add another victory to your tally today." Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Weber and the Luftwaffe High Command could not yet comprehend was how America's industrial might had created a fighter that would shatter their assumptions and change the air war over Europe forever. The 56th Fighter Group, known as Zemke's Wolfpack after their commander Colonel Hubert Zemke, had arrived in England in January 1943. Unlike most other fighter groups equipped with the nimble P-47 Thunderbolt, they had not yet been blooded in combat. Captain David Schilling, a 22-year-old from Kansas who commanded the 62nd Fighter Squadron, sat in the cockpit of his P-47 Thunderbolt as ground crews performed final checks. The massive fighter, weighing over 7 tons fully loaded, dwarfed the British Spitfires parked nearby at Horsham St. Faith Air Base in Norfolk, England. "You sure this refrigerator with wings will actually fight, Cap?" asked Technical Sergeant Roy Miller as he checked the 8.50 caliber machine guns in the Thunderbolt's wings. Schilling patted the armored side of his cockpit. "The boys at Republic Aviation didn't build us a dancer, Sergeant. They built us a heavyweight boxer. Those Messerschmitts are in for one hell of a surprise." Miller looked skeptical. "If you can catch them first, those 109s are mighty quick." Schilling grinned. "Speed isn't everything, but when we need it." He tapped the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine housing before him. "This beast has plenty to give." As the P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group took off to escort B-17 bombers targeting the Focke-Wulf factory in Bremen, Colonel Zemke's voice crackled over the radio. "Remember, boys, we're new to this theater. Jerry thinks he knows what we can do. Let's show him otherwise." Across the North Sea, Hauptmann Wilhelm Keller paced before a map in the briefing room at a Luftwaffe airfield near Münster. At 29, Keller had accumulated 76 confirmed aerial victories, mostly on the Eastern Front, before being transferred west to face the increasing American bomber threat. His Knight's Cross with oak leaves marked him as one of the Luftwaffe's experienced veterans. "These Americans are bringing a new fighter to bear, the Republic P-47, Keller informed the 15 pilots seated before him. "Intelligence reports it's heavy, over 7,000 kilograms fully loaded, nearly twice the weight of our Bf 109s. Oberleutnant Weber raised his hand. "Sounds like an easy target. Herr Hauptmann?" Keller nodded. "Possibly. But remember what we learned in Russia. Never underestimate American industrial capacity. They have the luxury of producing machines we might consider impractical." Lieutenant Hans Müller, a fresh-faced 20-year-old with only 3 combat missions to his credit, leaned forward. "What are its weaknesses?" "Limited range," Keller replied, pointing to a crude outline of the P-47 on the blackboard. "Their escort fighters typically turn back here, about 175 kilometers inside our borders. The P-47s are reported to be sluggish in turning battles, particularly at lower altitudes. Engage them in tight maneuvers, force them below 15,000 feet, where our 109s have the advantage, and they become vulnerable." As the pilots filed out toward their aircraft, Keller pulled Weber aside. "Franz, watch over Miller today. He's eager but inexperienced." Weber nodded. "Of course, Wilhelm." I'll keep him on my wing. At 25,000 feet over Germany, the air temperature outside Captain Schilling's cockpit registered -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Despite the extreme cold, the P-47's cockpit heating system, one of many creature comforts that distinguished American aircraft from their European counterparts, kept him relatively comfortable. Through his canopy, Schilling could see the bomber formation ahead, 72 B-17 flying fortresses of the 305th Bomb Group, flying in tight combat boxes that maximized their defensive firepower. Blue leader to blue flight. Maintain position and stay alert, Schilling instructed his four-plane element. We're approaching the limit of our escort range. Lieutenant Thomas Nelson, flying as Schilling's wingman, responded, Blue 2 copies. Sure wish we had those drop tanks they've been promising. Another 50 miles would make all the difference. Soon enough, Schilling replied. Engineering's working on the attachment points. For now, we do what we can with what we've got. Suddenly, the radio erupted with urgent calls. Bandits! 3 o'clock high! BF-109s! Colonel Zemke's voice cut through the chatter. Wolfpack, engage! Keep them off the bombers! Schilling spotted them immediately, 20 Messerschmitts diving toward the bomber formation from 27,000 feet. Blue flight, follow me up, he commanded, pushing his throttle forward and pulling his 7-ton fighter into a steep climb. The Thunderbolt's massive R-2800 engine, producing 200 horsepower, responded with a surge of power. The 4 P-47s climbed to intercept the attacking Germans. Their 8 Browning machine guns, each loaded with 425 rounds, enough for approximately 30 seconds of continuous fire, a massive concentration of firepower that could tear apart any aircraft caught in its path. Oberleutnant Weber led his section of 4 Bf-109s in a diving attack on the American bomber formation. The standard Luftwaffe tactic was to approach from ahead and above, make a single firing pass, then dive away before the bomber's defensive guns could find their range. Müller, stay close, Weber instructed his wingman. We'll attack the lead bomber, then break right and come around for another pass. As Weber pushed his fighter into a dive, he spotted movement to his left, American fighters climbing to intercept. He recognized their silhouette immediately, the bulky, almost barrel-shaped fuselage of the P-47 Thunderbolt. Achtung! P-47s at 9 o'clock, he called to his flight. Proceed with the attack. They're too far to interfere. Weber lined up his shot on the lead B-17, watching as his tracer rounds connected with the bomber's right wing. But before he could press his advantage, his cockpit was filled with a thunderous roar as a massive shape flashed past his canopy, missing him by mere meters. Brake right! Brake right! Weber shouted as he hauled his control stick over, banking his Messerschmitt into a tight turn. Looking back, he saw 4 P-47s had somehow climbed to his altitude with surprising speed and were now pursuing his flight. Captain Schilling had led Blue Flight in a maximum performance climb, gaining altitude faster than the German pilots thought possible for such a heavy aircraft. Now he had one of the Messerschmitts in his sights. Blue Leader has the trailing bandit, he called, squeezing his trigger. The P-47 shuddered as all 8 50-caliber machine guns fired simultaneously, sending a deadly stream of armor-piercing incendiary rounds toward the Bf-109. The German fighter jittered as bullets tore into its left wing and engine cowling. Smoke poured from the damaged Messerschmitt as it rolled inverted and dived away. "Got him!" Nelson called. "Stay focused!" Schilling replied, already searching for another target. "They'll try to turn us. Don't play their game. Use our speed and dive when necessary." Weber watched in disbelief as Lieutenant Schmidt's Bf-109 spiraled downward, trailing smoke. The American fighters had caught them completely by surprise, demonstrating a climb rate that German intelligence had grossly underestimated. "Müller, follow me!" Weber called. "We'll split S and dive away. These P-47s can't follow us in a steep dive without breaking apart." Weber rolled his Messerschmitt inverted and pulled through into a diving split-S maneuver, a standard evasive tactic that had served Luftwaffe pilots well against earlier Allied fighters like the Spitfire and P-40, which would often shed wings or suffer structural failure if they attempted to follow such violent maneuvers at high speed. Watching the Messerschmitts flip, inverted, and dive away, Captain Schilling didn't hesitate. "Blue flight, follow my lead," he called, rolling his Thunderbolt and pushing the stick forward into a near-vertical dive. The massive P-47 responded instantly, its nose dropping through the horizon as gravity and the 200-horsepower engine combined to accelerate the fighter at a rate few aircraft could match. The airspeed indicator wound rapidly past 300, then 350, then 400 miles per hour as the Thunderbolt chased the diving Messerschmitts. In his cockpit, Schilling felt the controls stiffen as aerodynamic forces built up. But the P-47's robust airframe, designed specifically for high-speed dives, remained solid and responsive. Republic aviation engineers had purposely built the Thunderbolt to withstand the structural stresses of combat maneuvering at speeds that would tear apart most other fighters. As his airspeed passed 450 miles per hour and continued climbing, Schilling lined up his gun sight on one of the diving Messerschmitts, now less than 200 yards ahead. In the cockpit of his diving Bf-109, Oberleutnant Weber glanced back over his shoulder, expecting to have left the American fighters far behind. To his shock, he saw 4 P-47s still in pursuit, closing the distance despite the extreme speed of his dive. "Impossible!" he muttered in disbelief. His airspeed indicator showed 720 kilometers per hour, nearly 450 miles per hour, approaching the limits of the Messerschmitt's structural integrity. The control stick was shuddering in his hand as compressibility effects began to affect the 109's control surfaces. "Müller, level out at 4,000 meters," Weber called to his wingman. "No plane can dive this fast without breaking up." As Weber began to pull out of his dive, his aircraft buffeting violently as he approached the Messerschmitt's maximum dive speed, he heard Müller's panicked voice on the radio. "They're still behind us. They're firing." At that moment, Weber heard the distinctive sound of heavy machine gun rounds tearing through aluminum as tracers flashed past his canopy. Looking back, he saw Müller's Bf-109 take multiple hits, its right wing folding upward as it disintegrated under the structural stress of the high-speed dive, combined with battle damage. Desperately, Weber hauled back on his control stick, feeling his Messerschmitt groan under the extreme G-forces as he pulled out of the dive. His vision narrowed as blood drained from his head under the acceleration, but he maintained consciousness through the trained application of anti-G straining maneuvers. As his aircraft leveled at 10,000 feet, he searched frantically for pursuit, amazed to find himself still alive. Above him, the American P-47s had pulled out of their dive and were climbing back toward the bomber formation, leaving Weber to nurse his damaged fighter home and to report an aerial performance that would force the Luftwaffe to re-evaluate everything they thought they knew about American fighter capabilities. Back at Horsham St. Faith that evening, the pilots of the 56th Fighter Group gathered in the briefing room to debrief their first combat mission. The group had claimed 7 Messerschmitts destroyed against the loss of 2 P-47s, a promising start for their combat tour. Colonel Zemke stood before a map of Germany, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Gentlemen, today you've confirmed what we've been telling the 8th Air Force brass. The P-47 can not only escort bombers, but it can outfight the Luftwaffe when properly handled." Captain Schilling raised his hand. "The Germans seemed genuinely surprised by our performance, Colonel, especially in the dive." Zemke nodded. "That's our edge. The Luftwaffe has been fighting Spitfires that disintegrate above 450 miles per hour. Our Thunderbolt can dive at over 500 miles per hour without structural failure." Lieutenant Nelson whistled. I hit 5:15 on my clock, chasing that 109 today. Never felt so much as a shudder. That's the beauty of American engineering and production, Zemke said, tapping a technical diagram of the P-47 pinned to the wall. The Thunderbolt's wings are over 200 pounds heavier than they need to be for normal flight loads. Republic Aviation gave us a fighter that can take punishment no German aircraft can match. He turned to a production chart showing comparative aircraft manufacturing numbers. While the Germans build aircraft by hand, carefully conserving materials, we're mass-producing fighters on assembly lines. The P-47's empty weight is 900 pounds, nearly twice that of a Bf-109. We use more aluminum in the wing spars alone than they use in entire sections of their fighters. Technical Sergeant Miller, who had been invited to the debriefing, spoke up from the back of the room. I counted over 200 holes in Blue 4's aircraft. Any German fighter would have been torn apart, but Lieutenant Parker brought her home safely. Zemke nodded solemnly. That's another advantage the boys at Republic gave us. Survivability. The P-47 has armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a radial engine that can absorb tremendous damage and keep running. At Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin 2 days later, a meeting of senior officers had been hastily convened to discuss the unexpected performance of the American P-47 Thunderbolt. Oberleutnant Franz Weber had been flown in to personally deliver his combat report. General Major Adolf Galland, the general of fighters responsible for the defense of the Reich, studied the report with a deepening frown. "You're certain of these performance figures, Oberleutnant?" Weber stood at attention. "Absolutely, Herr General. I saw it with my own eyes. The P-47 not only matched our dive speed, but accelerated past us. My airspeed indicator showed 720 kilometers per hour when rounds began hitting my aircraft." Galland exchanged glances with Oberst Walter Grabmann of the Luftwaffe's technical division. "That exceeds the maximum dive speed of our Bf-109G by almost 100 kilometers per hour." Grabmann spread several technical drawings on the table. American industrial capacity allows them to over-engineer their aircraft in ways we cannot afford, Herr General. Our intelligence indicates the P-47's empty weight is approximately 4,500 kilograms, almost twice that of our Bf-109G at 700 kilograms. "How is this possible?" asked another officer. "Such a heavy fighter should be at a severe disadvantage." "American production techniques," Grabmann explained. "They're building what would be considered wasteful by our standards. The P-47's wing spars are nearly twice as thick as engineering requirements dictate. This adds unnecessary weight for normal operations, but provides structural integrity at dive speeds that would tear our aircraft apart." Weber spoke up. "The engine is also unlike anything in our inventory, Herr General. Massive in size, at least 18 cylinders, driving a 4-bladed propeller nearly 4 meters in diameter." Galland nodded grimly. "The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. Intelligence reports indicate it produces over 2,000 horsepower. Our BMW 801 in the Focke-Wulf 190 generates only 1,700, and our DB 605 in the Messerschmitt barely reaches 1,475. "Can we match this performance?" asked a Luftwaffe production official. Grabmann shook his head. "Not with current resources. Germany simply doesn't have the aluminum reserves to build fighters this way. The Americans can afford to use twice the material we do for the same component." Galland studied a map showing American fighter escort ranges. "For now, the P-47's limited range remains its weakness. Our tactics must adapt. Engage the bombers only after their escorts have turned back due to fuel constraints." Weber cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, Herr General, but there's something else. The P-47s we encountered were carrying no external fuel tanks. If they add drop tanks, Then the entire Reich will be within their escort range, Galland finished grimly. Gentlemen, we are witnessing the beginning of a fundamental shift in the air war. The Americans are bringing industrial might to bear in ways we cannot counter through tactical superiority alone. June 1943, 2 months after his first encounter with the P-47 Thunderbolt, Hauptmann Wilhelm Keller's Bf-109G spiraled through the clouds over central Germany, trailing smoke from a damaged engine. A formation of B-17 bombers had just completed a devastating raid on the Heinkel aircraft factory in Rostock, escorted the entire way by P-47 Thunderbolts, now equipped with drop tanks that extended their range by over 100 miles. Keller had scored one victory against a B-17 before being set upon by 2 Thunderbolts that dived on his squadron from 30 feet at speeds approaching 550 miles per hour. His wingman had been killed instantly, and Keller's own aircraft had taken heavy damage from the P-47's concentrated firepower, 8 50-caliber machine guns, delivering over 100 rounds per second. As he struggled to keep his crippled fighter airborne, Keller reflected bitterly on how completely the Luftwaffe had underestimated American technical capabilities. The P-47 Thunderbolt had proven not just a competent escort fighter, but a devastating interceptor. Its ability to absorb damage that would destroy a German fighter, dive at speeds that defied belief, and deliver overwhelming firepower had changed the fundamental equation of air combat over Europe. Nearby, Oberleutnant Franz Weber led what remained of his Staffel away from the American fighters, having lost 3 more pilots in the engagement. The psychological impact of the Thunderbolt's performance had been as significant as their technical superiority. Luftwaffe pilots now approached combat with American fighters with a new respect and increasingly trepidation. "Adler Squadron, form up!" Weber called to his remaining pilots. "We'll land at Wunstorf and rearm." "Do we go up again today?" asked a weary voice. Feldwebel Kurt Schmidt, a once confident pilot who had seen 8 of his comrades shot down in the past month. Weber hesitated before responding. "We go up as often as needed. The Führer expects it." The reality that none of them would voice was that the odds were shifting dramatically against them. Intelligence reports indicated American factories were now producing over 400 P-47 Thunderbolts each month, more than Germany's entire monthly fighter production across all models. And each of those American fighters could outperform, outgun, and outsurvive their German counterparts. At Horsham St. Faith, Captain David Schilling's Thunderbolt taxied to its hardstand after returning from the mission to Rostock. His aircraft had taken hits from a Focke-Wulf 190 that had made a head-on pass against his formation. But the P-47's rugged construction had shrugged off damage that would have downed most fighters. As ground crews swarmed around his aircraft, Technical Sergeant Miller whistled at the damage. "Jesus, Captain, look at this engine cowling. There's a hole big enough to put my fist through." Schilling climbed down from the cockpit, patting the Thunderbolt's side affectionately. "She's built like a tank, Roy. That's why we call her the Jug. She's got a punch like one, and she's just as tough." Miller pointed to a captured German aircraft being examined by intelligence officers at the far end of the field. "That 109 looks like a toy next to her." Schilling nodded. "Different design philosophy. Germans build the minimum aircraft needed to do the job. Lightweight, maneuverable, just enough engine and just enough firepower. We build the maximum aircraft possible, the biggest engine, the most guns, the strongest airframe." "American industrial might," Miller said proudly. "Exactly," Schilling replied. "While their engineers struggle to squeeze another 50 horsepower from their engines, Pratt & Whitney just builds ours 50% larger. While they carefully measure aluminum to save weight, Republic Aviation doubles the thickness of our wing spars. It's not just about better planes. It's about how many we can build and how quickly we can replace losses." Later that evening, Colonel Zemke addressed his pilots, standing before a large production chart that graphically illustrated the imbalance in fighter production between Germany and the United States. Gentlemen, today's mission confirms what 8th Air Force Headquarters now acknowledges. The P-47 Thunderbolt has changed the strategic equation over Europe. Our 7-ton jugs can not only escort bombers to targets deep in Germany, but can outfight the Luftwaffe when we exploit our advantages. He turned to a map of Germany covered with red pins indicating target locations. With our new drop tanks, no target in Germany is beyond our reach. The Luftwaffe can no longer wait for escorts to turn back before attacking our bombers. Lieutenant Nelson, now sporting 3 kill markings on his flight jacket, raised his hand. The Germans seem to be avoiding us now, Colonel. They go for the bombers and run when we appear. Zemke nodded. They've learned respect for American engineering. The psychological impact of an aircraft that can dive at 550 miles per hour cannot be overstated. German pilots were trained to believe their aircraft represented the pinnacle of aeronautical design. Discovering otherwise has shaken their confidence. As summer turned to fall in 1943, the balance of air power over Europe shifted decisively. The P-47 Thunderbolts of the 56th Fighter Group, along with other 8th Air Force fighter units, established air superiority that allowed Allied bombing campaigns to systematically destroy Germany's industrial capacity. By October, the 56th had become the highest-scoring fighter group in Europe, with Zemke's Wolfpack claiming over 200 aerial victories. Oberleutnant Franz Weber, promoted to Hauptmann after Wilhelm Keller's death in August, faced the increasingly grim reality of Germany's deteriorating air defense. As he briefed his pilots at an airfield near Hanover, the strain showed in his haggard appearance. "Fuel allocations have been reduced again," he informed his pilots, many of whom were teenagers, rushed through abbreviated training programs to replace combat losses. Training flights are suspended until further notice. All available fuel is reserved for combat operations. A young pilot raised his hand. "Herr Hauptmann, how are we supposed to improve without practice flights?" Weber had no satisfactory answer. While American pilots received over 200 hours of flight training before entering combat, Luftwaffe replacements were now lucky to get 50. The results were predictable. Mounting losses as inexperienced German pilots faced battle-hardened American fighter groups flying superior aircraft. "You will learn in combat," Weber said finally. "Those who survive will become instructors." The bitter irony was not lost on his pilots. Survival rates for new Luftwaffe pilots in late 1943 had fallen below 25% for their first 5 missions. By contrast, American fighter groups were not only receiving steady streams of replacement pilots, but were rotating experienced pilots back to the United States to train new cadets, creating a sustainable cycle that the German Air Force could not match. December 1943. A light snow fell on Horsham St. Faith as Captain David Schilling, now a major with 8 confirmed victories, prepared for a fighter sweep over northwestern Germany. His P-47D-15 featured the latest improvements: water injection to boost the R2800 engine to 300 horsepower for short periods, and a bubble canopy that eliminated the rear armor plate, providing 360-degree visibility. "Another beautiful morning for hunting," Schilling remarked to Colonel Zemke as they walked to their aircraft. Zemke nodded toward the line of P-47s, each carrying 2 150-gallon drop tanks. 8th Air Force finally understands what we've been telling them all along. Fighters win air superiority and bombers exploit it, not the other way around. "Jerry's been scarce lately," Schilling noted. "Last sweep we covered 300 miles inside Germany and barely saw a dozen 109s. "They're husbanding resources," Zemke replied. "Intelligence says they've pulled many fighter units back to defend the Reich itself. Plus, they're facing critical fuel shortages as our bombers pound their synthetic oil plants. The air war had evolved into a stark demonstration of industrial capacity. By late 1943, American factories were producing over 600 P-47 Thunderbolts monthly, more than Germany's entire fighter production. When a 56th Fighter Group pilot was shot down, a factory in Farmingdale, New York, had a replacement aircraft ready within days. When a Luftwaffe pilot was lost, Germany's strained production could not keep pace. In his quarters that evening, Zemke wrote in his journal, "The irony is not lost on us that the Luftwaffe, which once ruled the skies through technical superiority, has been overwhelmed by American production techniques they dismissed as crude and wasteful. Our overbuilt Thunderbolts, derided by German engineers as inefficient, have proven that in warfare, robustness trumps elegance when backed by industrial might." May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. On a captured Luftwaffe airfield near Frankfurt, Oberstleutnant Franz Weber, now one of the few surviving German aces with 132 confirmed victories, stood among rows of damaged and fuel-starved German fighters as American troops took control of the facility. Among the arriving U.S. forces was the 56th Fighter Group, which had ended the war as the top-scoring fighter unit in the 8th Air Force, with 677 confirmed air victories. Colonel David Schilling, who had succeeded Zemke as group commander, approached Weber with professional courtesy. Both men had survived a brutal air war that had claimed thousands of pilots on both sides. "Your reputation precedes you, Oberstleutnant Weber," Schilling said, extending his hand. "Your pilots gave us quite a fight." Weber shook the American's hand, "As did yours, Colonel, though the outcome was perhaps inevitable." Schilling gestured toward a P-47M, the final evolution of the Thunderbolt, parked nearby. Its massive airframe dwarfed the Bf-109s lined up on the German side of the field. "Would you care to see it?" Schilling offered. Weber nodded, professional curiosity overcoming national pride. As they walked toward the American fighter, he marveled at its size, over 36 feet long with a wingspan of 40 feet, compared to his Bf-109's 29-foot length and 32-foot wingspan. "I remember my first encounter with the Thunderbolt," Weber said, as they circled the massive fighter. "I told my wingman that no plane could dive that fast without breaking apart. We learned otherwise at great cost." Schilling ran his hand along the P-47's thick wing. Republic Aviation designed her to survive damage that would destroy most fighters. The wing spars are twice as thick as engineering requirements dictate. Weber nodded solemnly. "While our engineers sought to save every kilogram." Different approaches to the same problem," Schilling replied. "Your Messerschmitts were elegant machines, precisely engineered with no wasted material. But in war, redundancy becomes an advantage. When a 20mm shell hits an overbuilt wing spar, that wasted material becomes the difference between returning home and becoming a casualty." Weber gestured toward the P-47's massive R-2800 engine. "That engine, over 2,000 horsepower, our best power plants barely reached 1,500. Displacement," Schilling explained. "While your engineers worked miracles extracting power from smaller engines, we simply built ours bigger. The R-2800 is 2,800 cubic inches, almost 46 liters. When more power was needed, Pratt & Whitney added water injection to boost output to 2,300 horsepower. As they completed their tour of the aircraft, Weber's expression grew thoughtful. Perhaps the greatest error of the Luftwaffe was not in tactics or training, but in failing to recognize how American mass production would transform aerial warfare. "We thought craftsmanship would triumph over assembly lines." Schilling nodded. By 1944, Republic Aviation was completing a new P-47 every hour. When we lost planes, replacements arrived within days. When you lost irreplaceable experienced pilots, the technological advantages of your aircraft became meaningless. In the years after the war, the lessons of the P-47 Thunderbolt success influenced fighter design worldwide. The concept of building robust, powerful aircraft that could absorb damage and deliver overwhelming firepower became a cornerstone of American military aviation. The technical duel between German precision engineering and American industrial might had demonstrated that in prolonged conflict, production capacity could overcome tactical advantages. For Franz Weber, who immigrated to the United States in 1948 and eventually became a test pilot for Republic Aviation, the very company that had built the Thunderbolt, the irony was complete. The engineering philosophies he had once dismissed as wasteful became the foundation of his post-war career. In his 1962 memoir, Duels at 25,000 feet, Weber reflected, "We in the Luftwaffe were defeated not by better pilots or superior tactics, but by the American factory worker." The teenage girl riveting P-47 wing spars in Farmingdale, New York, had as much to do with our defeat as any ace pilot. When I watched a Thunderbolt absorb punishment that would have destroyed 3 Messerschmitts and still returned to base, I was witnessing the triumph of industrial democracy over precision craftsmanship. It was a lesson that would reshape aerial warfare forever. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II. And check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.